Good morning, my name is Clint, and today we are going to be using Monster Hunter as an outlet to discuss live service games and ultimately ask the question, is Monster Hunter the perfect example of a live service game? Before we get to that, let's talk about games as a service or live service games. So what is a live service game? Live service games aren't inherently bad. The concept has a lot of potential. I remember first being pitched the idea when I bought Half-Life 2 Episode 2 and had to download Steam for the first time. The idea was that having a title connected to the internet would make games no longer be a one and done experience, and instead they would become an ever-expanding service. A game that continues to expand beyond its launch date with updates and DLC. In theory, this meant we could have more of the game we loved without having to wait for a full-blown sequel to be released. The concept behind Valve releasing Half-Life 2's episodes was that we wouldn't need to wait forever to get to Half-Life 3 or Half-Life 2 Episode 3. It's kind of interesting then that this was my first introduction to the idea of games as a service and online releases. This might be the first red flag that things wouldn't exactly go as I imagined. This concept sounded exciting at the time, especially when I could rarely afford to add a new game to my library. The idea that a game could grow over time was deeply appealing to me. The service, as described, seemed to be included in the initial purchase price. The idea being that rather than just paying for what was there at launch, you were also paying for what was to come. You were paying for a service. Bear in mind that this was the same time that I believed Peter Molyneux when he said that planting an acorn in Fable would eventually grow into a tree. Rather than investing time into this promised mechanic, Peter Molyneux then added black dye as a microtransaction to his games. He used the power of being able to add things via the internet to sell us a way to dye our gear black. So maybe I shouldn't be surprised then when the seemingly groundbreaking idea almost immediately got corrupted by the commercial nature of the video game industry, before it even had a chance to find its artistic potential. Fast forward from Horse Armor DLC to Battle Passes, and we find ourselves in the modern landscape of games as a service that we live in today. A bastardized version of this gaming utopia that I had dreamed of. Rather than complete games expanding further after release, we instead get incomplete games that would over time potentially become complete games, depending on how monetizable they were and how successful that they were. We find ourselves in the Wild West of no one's figured this shit out yet. Every step forward, every chance to make this concept work, is sidestepped by new avenues to make money. Games are inherently expensive to make. It makes sense in a medium that requires so much money and time to make even the most basic shit. Developers would need to find a way to monetize their continued support in a game, somehow. After all, there's no such thing as a free lunch, and if teams of people are working on this extra content for us, then those people need to be paid and rewarded for their time and effort. But it really seems like we aren't just paying our favourite developers wages so that they can continue making our favourite games. But instead, it feels like we are funneling all this money towards those at the top. People who continue to push aggressive microtransactions and generally engage in dodgy practices designed to make money rather than a good experience for the customer. It seems like finding ways of making money has become more important than designing the best game that they can. This isn't an artist-led medium because this particular art form relies so heavily on money to exist. This is only more evident when you see that the price for an in-game cosmetic can add up to a third of the price of the game itself. There is no way that the development time for skins is worth that amount of money. You could argue that by paying for a skin in-game, by paying for a microtransaction, that we are opting in to donating towards the development of the game itself, that we have been given free access to its servers in some cases and free content post-launch So when we buy an overpriced cosmetic, we are essentially paying them back for all the free content that we've been given already and the hours that we have sunk in. But even this idea rings false when the quantity and quality that is being put out is often incredibly limited. When you can spend over 3 times the price of a full release game on something like Fallout 76 within a week on cosmetics alone, then you'd at least expect that this game by now would be the biggest, most feature-rich Fallout game ever made. But it isn't. The potential of our favourite games expanding and becoming bigger and better through continued support instead became a world where unfinished games could be released at full price, and we would instead be paying for the potential of the game getting better rather than paying for what it is. Did Fallout 76 get better? Yes. Did it ever become good enough to be worth the initial asking price, let alone our continued monetary support? No, it didn't. How is it then that a game like No Man's Sky, after its disappointing release, has continued to support its game with major updates in the form of large expansions for all of these years without asking for a dime, when a game like Fallout 76, a title in a much more popular franchise, has barely delivered a title worth its namesake and is still asking for subscriptions. Subscriptions that add up to a yearly purchase of a fully priced game and asking for more money over overpriced cosmetics and in-game items. There is no way that the money Bethesda earned on Fallout 76's release wasn't enough to pay for the development of a much larger, fully featured Fallout game, let alone all of the money that they've earned since. But why would they invest that money into making a fully complete Fallout game when they can instead invest it on things to sell in its in-game store? So, live service games are bad. It's not exactly a new concept. But what if I told you that there was a game using live service techniques to actually improve its experience? A game that isn't saving face with post-launch updates like No Man's Sky, or attempting to milk its audience on an incomplete promise like Fallout 76. A game that uses these games as a service concepts to expand, to get better, to improve the gameplay itself. And this series has been doing this successfully in the background for years. This video game series is Monster Hunter. Well, we got there. We finally got to the title of the video. As a Monster Hunter noob, I can only speak to 2 of the most recent Monster Hunter releases, and their DLCs. Monster Hunter World and Monster Hunter Rise. This covers around 4 years worth of Monster Hunter content. Monster Hunter, at its core, is a very simple game. The gameplay loop consists of hunting monsters, crafting weapons and armor from their parts, then hunting more monsters. As this loop continues, you get to fight different monsters, each with their own unique designs and attack patterns that continue to deepen as the game goes on and you master the game's mechanics. In a way, this game is made up almost entirely out of boss fights, separated by the preparation for said fights and tweaking your build. Monster Hunter is also an online game, where you can hunt monsters with your friends and randoms via online matchmaking. The problem with online games is that if everyone stops playing, a core part of that game dies. In Monster Hunter, everything can be tackled solo, but the joy of hunting with others would be removed if no one else was playing. So Monster Hunter needs to keep people engaged and coming back, so that core pillar of the game's experience is preserved. Another factor that games as a service adds to the Monster Hunter series is by adding weight to your in-game gear and rewards. When a new hunt is always on the horizon, then the gear that you have worked towards getting has added value. Have you ever spent hours in a game's post-game to earn the best gear, only to not really have a reason to use it? So the games as a service element to Monster Hunter almost exists out of necessity for the game to continue to work. The service elements are, in a way, fulfilling an artistic need to preserve the Monster Hunter experience, so that no matter when you join Monster Hunter, you can still experience its online component. We have all probably had the experience of starting a game too late and not having the online experience available to us. That was at one stage a core element to the title because not enough people are playing it anymore. So, what live service elements and tactics do the Monster Hunter games employ to keep this core element of the game, the multiplayer, alive? Title updates that add new monsters, weekly events that allow the player to unlock new skins, emotes and stickers, a never-ending endgame that is tweaked post-release and present in the base game, a massive paid expansion pack that in turn comes with even more title updates and monsters, even more weekly events with rewards, another massive endgame grind added for the DLC content, and so on. So there's a lot of content released for Monster Hunter, both in its base game and post-launch content. So how does Monster Hunter sustain this continued support? Like we said earlier, there's no such thing as a free lunch. The developers need to be paid for their time. Monster Hunter doesn't have a 10-year plan, a battle pass or subscription service. All of this additional content is included in the price of the base game and its eventual massive expansion. So we have a ton of content, continued support, and only 2 substantial purchases. That's it. Kind of. There are, however, microtransactions, and at first they seem like a lot. They seem kind of bad. What we have here are packs of minimal, minor content being sold for 1/3 the price of the base game. Not a great look. But unlike, say, Fallout 76, where cosmetics are refreshed weekly to scare you into buying them by employing the dreaded fear of missing out, there are no FOMO tactics employed in Monster Hunter. The purely cosmetic DLC that gets added to the store just stays there. In fact, every weekly event that is added to the game for free just stays in the game. It just builds on the game's existing content. So cosmetic DLC, is it really that bad? It seems that gamers made a deal with the devil at some point, a concession that if game developers are inevitably going to add microtransactions into a game, then it should be only cosmetic. Nothing game changing, nothing pay to win. We collectively agree to this, not realizing how much cosmetics in games actually drive us. Cosmetics, in a way, act like collectibles. They become something in-game to work towards or obtain. For those of us raised on Mario games and collectathons, the aim of collecting everything to complete a game is deeply baked into our gaming DNA. In-game cosmetics are important to the experience, to making our characters feel unique. The idea that content, no matter how small, is inaccessible, that it is permanently locked off to us, either by disappearing from a FOMO-driven marketplace, or that it has become unreasonably expensive to collect everything, it can ruin the game. It can ruin the experience, the sense of being able to complete a game. If I can't possibly earn everything in a game, then why should I even try? So all of this to say that I believe that cosmetics in games are more important to the overall experience than we would like to admit, and that turning these into microtransactions is still, in my mind, detrimental to a game's overall experience. In Assassin's Creed Valhalla, a single-player game that does not need players to constantly be playing to preserve its experience, has microtransaction cosmetics. Elaborate armor pieces that can be bought from its in-game store. This is a meaty game, so you could potentially argue that it's okay because of the amount of content you get from the base game's initial package. And you can technically get these armors by spending in-game currency that you earn by completing daily and weekly quests. Although to do this, you have to be lucky enough for this content to even be available in the weekly rotating in-game store. What makes this worse is the rate at which you unlock armor sets in the base game itself. Around 60 hours in, I had about 5 different bland-looking armor sets. The weapons and armor in the online store looked so much more interesting and varied, making me question why I'm even seeking out the in-game armor pieces that I have available to me when I have to spend real-world money to get anything interesting. Why then am I even trying to 100% the map when I can't technically even 100% the game itself? because there is content that I just can't get without spending an absurd amount of money or an even more absurd amount of time. So yeah, I think cosmetics in-game are important, and I do not think they should be sold piecemeal. So why then am I kind of okay with cosmetic microtransactions in Monster Hunter? Well, let's compare Assassin's Creed Valhalla to Monster Hunter Rise, and the way that they differ in terms of how they present their microtransactions. For a start, Valhalla does not need to be a live service game to keep its experience alive. It is a single player game. You're not missing out on anything if no one else is playing it. Yet it has live service elements to keep people in its world, to keep people looking at its online store. It feels like Valhalla is designed to have you long for these microtransaction skins. If you really want to make your character look different or unique, then you'd better spend some hard-earned cash, or be stuck with the bland armor that Ubisoft gives you in the base game. Compare that to Monster Hunter, where it has hundreds of unique armor pieces in-game already that you can mix and match. You can even customize the color of each piece. The need to spend money on microtransactions to feel like your character is unique is non-existent. Monster Hunter isn't restricting its coolest armor pieces to its microtransactions. Assassin's Creed Valhalla makes you feel like you are missing out on something by not buying into their in-game store, by limiting what you can get in-game. Monster Hunter does not do that. It offers you a huge amount of in-game content and only puts up a small amount of niche pieces of cosmetic DLC that you can buy. Most importantly, Monster Hunter's microtransactions are not FOMO based. It's just there if you want it. It's not going to disappear just to try and scare you into buying it. It's just there if you want it. If you are obsessively into the idea of having every piece of content, it might lure you into purchasing it. But if you have at that point invested over 400 hours into collecting everything that Monster Hunter already has to offer, then maybe the developers deserve that little bit of extra cash for the product that they've already delivered. Another way to keep people engaged in a games as a service game is limited time events. A game will have an event taking place within a short window of time that encourages players to all log in at once to earn unique rewards. Battle passes are the natural extension of this. Seasons of time-limited content designed to get the player to engage in the game as often as possible. A lot of times requiring daily participation to earn all of the rewards for the Battle Pass. This is an all-consuming way of keeping the player in the game's ecosystem. If you take a month off, then you're just going to miss out and you might regret it later. So you better just keep playing. This is FOMO on Hyperdrive. Battle passes often ask for a seemingly reasonable upfront fee, sometimes around 10 to 15 Australian dollars, but this fee works ultimately against you. If you don't complete the Battle Pass, then you haven't earned everything that $10 was meant to get you. You've wasted your money. The sunk cost fallacy is an action here to keep you hooked. The longer you do these daily grinds, the more often you get to see the online in-game store. The more likely it is that you will want to spend real money on microtransactions. You know, why not spend $25 on a skin for a game that you've spent 50 hours on in the last week grinding through a battle pass, right? Even if those 50 hours are driven primarily by FOMO rather than your enjoyment. Event content in Monster Hunter doesn't go away. It does not disappear. It simply adds to the game's existing content. There is no fear of missing out here. If you come in late, it only means that there will be more content available to you when you come back. When an event update releases, it still pulls the community back into the game. It still gives everyone a reason to check back in, but it does not use FOMO tactics to do this. This only benefits the game. Miss a few months because another game takes your interest, then that's okay, because everything you missed is still there. One key benefit to this tactic is that it is very easy to jump back in, because you don't feel like you've missed out on much. You're coming back in and everything's still there. So if Monster Hunter's aim isn't to have people logging in every day to tempt them into online purchases, and it has this open door policy for gamers coming and going when they want, then how does Monster Hunter monetize itself? Monster Hunter monetizes itself by making you see the value in your initial purchase. It then, after well and truly giving you the value for that purchase, offers you an expansion. A one-off additional purchase that more than doubles the length of the original game, adding new monsters, new reasons to fight old monsters, a new location, new hubs, tons of new cosmetics and gameplay mechanics, then new event quests, free title updates, and more. All of this for about the price of 3 skins in Halo Infinite. It's relatively expensive, but you know at this point whether or not it's going to be worth it. And if you enjoy Monster Hunter, it will be. All of this builds trust in its players. It keeps the game alive, but more importantly, it feels like it has given us value for our money. So when Monster Hunter inevitably releases a sequel, you know it's going to be worth your investment. One more argument to consider is that Monster Hunter's updates don't really require that much work when you compare it to other live service games. They are only really adding a new monster every now and again, and a few cosmetics, while they often reuse monsters just with different colours and elemental effects. It's not like other games that need to add new voiced characters, new locations, new enemies in their updates to make an update. So how can you compare what Monster Hunter releases to, say, what Fallout 76 releases? And to that argument I'd say, maybe Fallout 76 shouldn't be a live service game if it takes so much time and resources to make its content that it can't even deliver it. If a solid Fallout game takes 4 to 6 years plus to create, then maybe that sort of game shouldn't be a live service title. If you can't make that game feel fresh by adding regular small tweaks, small updates, then maybe the entire design of that game is not suited for a live service model. A recent title update to Monster Hunter Rise added 4 new monsters, all of these reskins of existing monsters that act in different ways. This is all it takes in a Monster Hunter game to make the experience feel fresh again. Gold Rathian might largely look exactly like a regular Rathian with a new coat of paint, but the fight feels different. When you beat it, you get the parts you need to create a cool new armor set and a new weapon, with new skills that can alter your playstyle and build, on top of looking kind of rad. All of these small tweaks end up adding to a lot here. They might not seem like much, but in Monster Hunter they are. 4 new monsters and a free title update adds a lot to Monster Hunter. Whereas Fallout 76 can't just add a new boss to the game and have it feel like it's made much of a difference, because the game design for a Fallout game simply doesn't allow for that. It isn't about the boss fights, and it never has been. It's about exploration, building your own story, role-playing. All of these things can't be built upon fast enough to make for an engaging, ongoing online experience. Could Monster Hunter release more completely unique monsters in its updates and be better for it? Yeah, it could. But it would mean more development time, more cost on their end, and that would eventually translate to more cost on ours. It might make it necessary for them to find other ways of monetizing their product. But does Monster Hunter need to add new monsters to stay fresh? Not really. In the Monster Hunter community at the moment, everyone is excited for an update that will add a fire version of an already existing monster. This seemingly small change is enough to get everyone excited to come back. Monster Hunter is almost perfectly designed to work as a live service game, and it is currently the shining example of that concept's potential. I can come and go as I please, it doesn't beg me for extra money or continued attention, and it gives me a reason to want to come back without making me feel guilty for taking a break. Is it perfect? No. But it could be the very best example of a live service game's potential yet.